The 1980 Chevrolet Citation was GM's attempt at competing with the slick European hatchbacks. But this vehicle proved to be unreliable, which was shocking considering it had the name Citation. In reality, the police should have issued a citation to anyone driving this vehicle because it was so darn ugly. The 1983 Glenfrome Facet was a unique-looking car to say the least. I'm not sure what's going on here, but it looks like it had pieces from numerous cars and it had some sort of genetic disorder. This car was from a British company that customized vehicles for rich Middle Eastern clients. They sold it for £55,000, which was about $82,000 at the time. If you bought this ugly car, then it was proof that you had way too much money. The 1980 Toyota Corolla Tercel was definitely a mouthful to say. Was it a Corolla or a Tercel? Who knows, but it was an ugly compact car. They really looked cheap, and they sure didn't win over many people. It's no wonder why people referred to them as the Turdcel. The 1980 Cadillac Seville looked like a normal Cadillac in the front, but when you walked around to the back, it had problems. It looked like it had backed up into something, or maybe had a slice taken out of the trunk. Many people either loved or hated it, but as we look back on this one, I'm sure that most of us hate it.
It's not a caddy, it's a piece of shit.
The 1984 Zimmer Quicksilver sounds like something that should be cool, but it wasn't.
Zimmer?
The car had chrome accents all over that just looked out of place.
Looks like a horrible Lincoln.
The elongated hood gave the impression that it had a powerful engine, but it only had a horrible V6 in it.
Oh.
The price tag on this flattened-looking car was $50,000, which was about the same price as a Mercedes during the same time period.
How about the Merc? I give you a
In the 1980s, Japanese automakers came on strong, but the 1985 Subaru XT was a little weak. The front end was decent looking, but it looked like they gave up on designing the rear end. Overall, it sort of looked like a doorstop. The LCD dash had the appearance of a cheap video game, and the steering wheel was also odd-looking.
Looks like a gun.
And we won't even mention what the gear shifter looked like.
The steering looks like a gun.
The 1989 Escargot was a cargo van that looked like a snail. What a fitting name, right? Escargot? Get it? Really, the S just stood for what it really was. A big honkin' piece of sh**. This vehicle was only available in Japan. I guess they were too embarrassed to take this one into other countries. In 1987, Nissan came out with another bad creation. The Nissan Pulsar NX is a perfect example of what not to do in a car. Its claim to fame was that it had an interchangeable rear hatch. You either had the choice between an ugly hatchback or a stupid-looking wagon. Surprisingly, this car never caught on with consumers. I guess it had no pulse. The Fiat Panda came out in 1980 and it was supposed to be a basic economy car. But they basically created something that was only cutting corners on quality. The car had straight-edge sheet metal and the bumpers were unpainted. The seats were highly uncomfortable and the car itself looked like a disposable Polaroid camera. And what's going on with the grill intake that's only on one side? For some reason, Fiat kept this litter box in production for 23 years.
It must have been good for something.
Thankfully, this one never made it to the U.S., but the Nissan 1400 pickup was sold in South Africa.
It's cute.
Not only was it ugly, but the cab was very small. People who were taller than 5 foot 9 inches had trouble squeezing into this high-performance donkey cart. The 1981 Maserati Biturbo was supposed to be sleek and sexy, but in reality they were underpowered and a pain to work on. That was important to know because they were unreliable as well. I'm not quite sure what they were trying to accomplish with this one, but it checks all the boxes for one terrible car. Cadillac went to an all-new low with the 1982 Cadillac Cimarron. You've probably forgotten about these, and for good reason. They were extremely ugly and almost pulled the company down the drain. The car had absolutely nothing special about it, and it was a commercial failure. It left most people wondering why it even had the Cadillac badging on it. Initially, they put an 80 horsepower four-cylinder engine in it, and later on, they upgraded it to a V6 with a whopping 130 horsepower. No matter what they did to the car, it continued to be a piece of crap. The 1984 Ford Tempo was created to be more environmentally friendly with a more modern styling. The design was...
I had a Ford Tempo. It was a two-door coupe, but I had a Ford Tempo. It was a two-door, and that thing ran like a top. A Ford Tempo four-door. No, I had a Ford Tempo, but mine was a two-door, and that thing ran like a top. That thing was fun. That thing was fast. That thing was awesome to drive.
Pretty bland, and even the headlights looked depressed. But if you didn't like this Ford version, then you could always upgrade to the Mercury Topaz, which was really the same uninspiring design.
The Tempo was pretty good.
The 1981 AMC Eagle Camback was a pretty strange vehicle. AMC was the same company that brought you the Gremlin. By the 1980s, the company had many vehicles that were outdated, and they were beginning to have financial troubles. But one successful thing that they did have was the Jeep division. So naturally, their thought was to make 4x4 cars. However, this Gremlin base model took it a bit too far. In the end, they didn't sell too many of these cars, and for good reason. Who wants a Gremlin on stilts with outdated colors?
JB Weld bonds, seals, and fills gaps. Learn more at jbweld.com.
Oh, yeah, right, like a little Old Spice.
Alfa Romeo came out with a Milano in 1985. It was supposed to be a larger car, but it was then determined that it needed to be smaller. It's pretty clear that they didn't know what to do with this one. But hey, this particular model has racing stripes, and it makes it all better, right? Hyundai's breakthrough car into the American market was the 1985 Excel. It did not win any beauty contests, but the affordable price of $4,995 helped it to sell 168,000 units during its first year, which solidified the South Korean brand. However, no one is showing these at classic car meets, which means that they are just better off rusting away in junkyards. In the 1980s, the Ford Thunderbird was showing out the Monte Carlo in the NASCAR racing. In an effort to make it more aerodynamic, GM released the Aero Coupe on the Monte Carlo in 1986, as well as the Pontiac Grand Prix 2+2. It really had the appearance like they just slapped extra glass on the rear rather than engineering something better in a proper build. They were actually odd looking, and thankfully this didn't stick around. Believe it or not, there are actually some car fanatics that love these. The Lincoln Mark VII was basically an upscale version of the Ford Thunderbird and Mercury Cougar. The LSC model had the same engine as the Mustang GT, but the overall styling was a bit off. It sported chrome overhangs that stuck out on both ends, and the trunk was just plain ugly. There were quite a few of these on the road, but that certainly did not mean that they were good looking. Probably the worst looking car from the 80s had to be the Yugo, which came out in 1985 and stayed around in the US until 1992. The Yugo 45 came with a 1.0 liter engine that had 45 horsepower. Later on, Yugo souped them up with a 1.3 liter engine that had a high output of 65 horsepower. Initially, the Yugos sold somewhat well, but as the years went on, they sold less. They were the cheapest cars that you could possibly buy, and if you ever rode in one, you could certainly tell. There were tons of jokes made about this car, like the Yugo when you push, or how about the rear window defroster to keep your hands warm while you pushed it in the winter. These cars were not only ugly, but they were extremely unreliable.
They also killed a person driving the Mecklenburg Bridge.
For every nice car that was made in the 80s, there were probably 10 to 15 ugly ones. We certainly couldn't include every ugly car in this short video, but what are some of the ones that we missed? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.